Welcome to another edition of 30 Minutes with the Author. I'm your host, Lori Crever. In this edition, we're joined by Ellen Sandbeck. She's a landscape gardener and graphic designer in Duluth, Minnesota. And she's written a couple of books. One is titled Eat More Dirt, Diverting and Instructive Tips for Growing and Tending an Organic Garden. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. Let's first start by talking about why organic.
Well, in my case, it's because I'm terrified of chemicals. And when I graduated with my newly minted BA in art and my wonderful wage-earning capabilities and a landscaping job fell in my lap, which I eagerly accepted, even though I had never done it professionally before, I began trying to research the best way to go about organic landscaping and discovered there were no books on organic landscaping. This was a while back. Because I graduated when the dinosaurs were still stomping the earth. Anyway, so I decided I better just do some agricultural research. So I went back to the pre-World War II agricultural and gardening books, because World War II was when chemical gardening and agriculture really started, because the chemical companies had been geared up for the war effort. And when the war ended, they were all dressed up with nowhere to go, and they wanted to sell their product. So they started this huge advertising blitz, which was sort of the same sort of thing that was done to women when they were trying to convince women that they had to go back into the kitchen and out of the workplace. And it was the same sort of advertising campaign. It was based on fitting in with the neighbors and shame and guilt. So people were made to feel guilty for having, spots on their clothes. They were made to feel guilty for having dandelions in their lawn. They were made to feel immoral for these things. And this was in the case of lawn chemicals. It was because the chemical companies were trying to sell their broadleaf herbicides. And if you're using broadleaf herbicides, you can't have clover in your lawn. So in order to kill the dandelions, which were immoral, you were also killing the clover. And mixed clover and grass lawns were really the traditional sort of lawn, which almost became extinct because of this advertising campaign, which was a shame, because it's the clover in the lawn that makes the lawn sturdy and hardy and drought resistant and will stay green if there's a drought. And without that clover, the grasses just aren't as hardy. So anyway, I was doing all this research on this older generation of agricultural and gardening books, and began testing out my newfound ideas and experimenting in other people's yards, which is a wonderful way to learn quickly, because there are different sets of conditions in everyone's yard. So I would, I'd have one job, and then the neighbors would be interested. And it was actually my husband now, but then my boyfriend. And I would do, job after job going down the street. And we weren't getting the jobs because we were organic. In fact, nobody wanted organic landscaping then. We wouldn't even tell people we were doing it organically. We were bidding against the chemical, regular, run-of-the-mill landscapers, and we were underbidding them because we weren't spending money on chemicals. We weren't spending money on machinery. We were underbidding them because it took us far less time to put in a garden, and the garden was much healthier. In fact, when we started, we didn't even have a car, so we couldn't use machinery. We were commuting on the BART, the mass transit train.
Oh, in California?
In California, with our tools. You cannot imagine the kinds of looks you get when you're carrying shovels and picks and pruners and saws on the train. I don't think you could do it now. You'd get arrested.
Because I think the BART is Bay Area Rapid Transit, so it's kind of like the subway in New York type thing.
And there we were with our shovels and lots of dirt by the end of the day.
Right. So I think that this is probably surprising to people, that it could be factually less expensive to landscape and garden organically, but it just sounds like it's an education step that's required.
The machinery's up here. Definitely. It does take more knowledge, because you can't just buy something at the store and spray it. You do have to do some reading and talk to people who know what they're doing in your area, but it's well worth it, because if you're doing non-chemical gardening, you have a much stronger connection to where you really are. You have to understand what you're dealing with. You know the plants more intimately. When you're pulling a weed as opposed to spraying it, you have to get much closer to it. When you're dealing with pests in an organic way, sometimes you're almost nose to proboscis with a pest, and you actually get to know that pest a little better. And in fact, when you're gardening organically, you tend to have far fewer pests because you're not killing off the predatory insects that would eat the pests. So one of our first jobs was down the street from our very first job. Our very first job, we put in a huge diversity of plants, and we had flowers of all kinds blooming all the time. And it was just a beautiful, peaceful, colorful, fun place to be. 4 houses down, we got another job, and the owner of the house said to us, "This way, this garden drives me insane." And it did. She was a very neat person, and she thought she should be able to control her garden in the same way that she controlled her living room. This is not possible. Gardens are outdoors, living rooms are indoors. You know, you can't control what's going to blow through or drop from the sky or crawl under a fence, but she felt she had to, and it drove her insane. And she had a very, I call it the tailored look garden. She had shrubbery set into gravel beds, which means that every time a leaf drops, you have to pick it out or rake it out. She had, you know, the completely weedless cracks in her driveway and in her sidewalk. She had topiaries and clipped hedges, and it was all very, very high maintenance, but looked like nothing. There was nothing to catch your eye that was interesting because it was all very green and very angular.
Yes.
So it looked like it was a nothing garden, but it was incredibly high maintenance. So she was driving herself crazy so she could have this garden that looked like it belonged outside, you know, an industrial park.
Yeah.
And in her backyard, when we walked into the backyard, every single plant was covered with whitefly, to the point where it looked like whitish green instead of green. I had never seen a whitefly in my life until I went into that garden.
Wow. And where do they come from? I mean, is it actual?
They're little tiny white flies, like that big in there, and they suck plant juices and they weaken the plants. But you don't tend to have them outdoors unless you're spraying chemicals. She was actually causing this problem. She opened her shed door and she had enough chemicals in that shed to poison every living thing for 10 square miles probably, floor to ceiling chemicals.
So this is very interesting. I think people's viewpoint would probably be, I'm going to use this chemical because it's a quick,
easy
solution, quick, easy fix, right? But I get what you're saying is all we're really doing is putting an interference of magnitude into the natural order of things, and it's going to be far worse. It's really going to degrade your situation, not improve it.
She was spraying malathion once a week for those white flies, and they were increasing in number, and it was just driving her insane. So we said, well, you know, after we saw the arsenal of chemicals in the shed, we kind of closed the door and said, well, there's this product that works really well. It's called Safer's soap. It's an insecticidal soap, and it works really nicely, and would you like to try it? And she said,
I'll try anything, yeah.
So we brought her some the next week, and you know, it had clear instructions on how much it has to be diluted. And Safer's soap is a product that's formulated to not suds up, so you can put it in a spray bottle and spray it and it doesn't clog up because of the suds.
Okay.
It's just fatty acids, and it's completely biodegradable. It's made from oils and fats and things. And she loved it. She sprayed it once a week, and very happily, because she was a very busy sort of person. She sprayed it once a week and her whiteflies disappeared. And it wasn't just because the Safer soap was killing the whiteflies, which it was doing. It was because it wasn't killing the predatory insects that were eating the whiteflies. So eventually she really didn't have to spray at all because there were no whiteflies.
Let's talk about some other natural predators that are a welcome friend, an ally to your garden. I thought bats were an interesting one.
Bats are the best control for mosquitoes, because people think, oh, birds eat mosquitoes, which they do, but mosquitoes tend to be out at night, and most birds that eat mosquitoes are not out at night. So bats are amazing predators. They can catch up to 500 mosquitoes per hour. sometimes even up to 1,000 mosquitoes per hour, depending on the density.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
They don't hunt all night. So a little brown bat will eat maybe 2,000 mosquitoes per night, but that's one bat. They're selling these mosquito-killing machines. I can't remember what they're called offhand, but they emit carbon dioxide and they are heated, so the mosquitoes are attracted to the carbon dioxide and the heat. And I've read about them on the internet, all these glowing testimonies. Oh, there were 500 mosquitoes in the morning in this, and the machines cost hundreds of dollars.
Yes.
And they catch fewer mosquitoes per night than one little brown bat.
Oh my goodness.
And if you have a little colony of little brown bats, usually they're not solitary, they're colonial animals. If you have a colony in a bat house, you can have up to 50, say, in a small bat house. And how much does the bat house cost compared to this machine that's killing, a quarter as many mosquitoes per night as one bat?
Right.
So people get really vicious about bats. They're afraid of them. They think, oh, I'm going to get rabies.
Yeah.
But
it's all the Dracula movies too. Doesn't help.
It's partially. But just like any other wild animal, you should never pick up a wild bat. You should never pick up, just like you wouldn't pick up a
raccoon
or a raccoon or a rat or anything like that. You should never touch a wild animal of any kind. And bats don't chase after people and chomp on them. So if you just don't touch them, you're fine.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah. Let's talk about somebody, for instance, who is perhaps a new homeowner here in the Twin Cities, and so they're going to get exposed to caring for their own lawn and their own garden for the first time.
Right.
What would be some real simple tips?
Well, for one thing, if you don't have anybody in your household who's allergic to bee stings, so that they would have the anaphylactic shock problem and you take them to the hospital, so you're not worried about clover blossoms, definitely put some clover seed in your lawn, and that will make the whole lawn tougher and more drought hardy. And the Twin Cities have periodic droughts.
Yes.
And if you have clover mixed in with your lawn grass, when your lawn grass goes dormant from a drought, the clover will not, and you'll still have a green lawn. Plus, because clover is a leguminous plant, it has nitrogen-fixing nodules on the roots, so it pulls in nitrogen from the sky, so you get free fertilizer. And when you mow, if you leave the clippings on the lawn, the clover clippings break down into fertilizer.
Wow.
And also, when you mow your lawn, you should set the lawnmower as high as you possibly can, and this helps it not only shade out weeds underneath, but it'll prevent weed seeds from reaching the ground where they can germinate. It's very similar to if you have a person who has a crew cut and you can see their whole scalp.
Yes.
And if you threw, say, thistle seeds on their head, some of those thistle seeds would actually be touching their scalp. But if they have longer hair, those thistle seeds will be stuck up on the top, and if they germinated because you sprayed them with water, the seeds wouldn't send roots into their scalp.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And what about the walking around the neighborhood and consulting other homeowners who have gardens that you like?
Yes. If you really want to have the easiest, hardiest possible garden, the best way to do it is to walk around in your area, preferably when people are out in their gardens, which sometimes is after work. In the summer, people really like to go out in their gardens and unwind. And just look at the kinds of plants that are out there and think about the ones that you like and talk to the gardeners. Most gardeners are fairly friendly and they love to show off their gardens.
Yes.
And if you're talking to a gardener who actually has a garden that's very healthy, that gardener is very likely to have more plants than they can deal with, because healthy plants tend to reproduce. They make seedlings, they spread, and most people don't have enough room for all those offspring.
Yeah.
And so most gardeners tend to give away plants, and the plants they give away are the ones that are extremely hardy and will do very well in your area. You do want to talk to somebody you trust before you take plants, though, because there are a lot of invasive plants out there that you really don't want to take home. And those will vary from area to area depending on what the climate in that particular area is and what the soil type is. So I don't want to start trying to say, oh, don't take this ever, don't take that ever, but
Be discerning.
People in your area will know what they are.
Okay.